Norfolk Business Show with Danny Snelling. Sponsored by MT Comms.
So Louise Cornell, nice to have you here.
Nice to be here.
Bringing up the woman side of these things, because I am sadly lacking in women volunteers to come on the show.
Can't say I volunteered.
Okay. Very true. But thank you for coming on. So what do people know you for at the moment? What's your business and what do you get up to?
Yeah, so I run a business called CC Planning, and we're a planning consultancy business, primarily working across Norfolk. And we provide planning advice and help people to achieve planning consent for projects that they've got. So whether that is for new residential, commercial, expansion of existing premises, or minerals and waste planning, all kinds of things that involve planning permission, we will advise on and we will help people through the planning process. That's actually only one side of the business though, actually. In fact, the business started almost 6 years ago, and at the time it was set up to support town and parish councils to develop neighbourhood plans. So my background is in kind of planning policy, and that's what's used to determine planning applications. And under the localism agenda, town and parish councils were given the opportunity to develop their own mini local plans called neighbourhood plans. And actually, that's what I first started the business doing, was supporting town and parish councils and taking them right through the process, which can take anywhere between 18 months and kind of 4 years, probably is the longest one I've worked on, where they develop their own policy, which is then used to determine the planning applications. So that's kind of where it all started.
So are you suggesting you are telling the planners what they can and can't accept? So you're to blame for everything?
Yeah. So the planning authorities, so each of the district councils in Norfolk, they have a local plan, and that contains all the kind of strategic policies in terms of where they want to see housing growth and big kind of site allocations, big housing allocations, but also lots of other kind of non-strategic policies in terms of design, kind of density of development, what kind of environmental improvements should be seen, that kind of thing. And that policy, the local plan, covers the whole of the planning authority area, the whole of the district area. And what I do is I will work with a much smaller area, a parish or a town, and they develop their own kind of mini policy document, essentially.
I see.
Yeah, there's kind of a lot of work that goes into that though. So it's also a regulated process, just like the local plan process is. So we do lots of kind of consultation, engagement with residents. We work with kind of a group of residents and the parish council to kind of identify what the key priorities and what issues are that need to be addressed within that local area. And then we essentially write a plan that aims to address those through future development.
And that's that side of it, and then you've also got the residential side.
I don't often talk about that actually, particularly at kind of networking groups, because a lot of the work we do around neighbourhood plans comes very much word of mouth. We're probably the biggest consultancy in Norfolk that does neighbourhood planning.
Yeah.
And we just get a lot of work off the back
it's
of that.
also over a lot of people's heads, I would imagine, as to what it is, and you have to be, in that.
Yeah.
But presumably you do a lot of normal planning help and planning consultant as well.
That's right. Yeah. So we are also the kind of the traditional planning consultancy that if someone, wants to do something with their land, they want to do something with their property, they're going to need some planning permission for that, unless they can do it under permit development rights. And we would provide them with planning advice in terms of whether that's likely to be acceptable in principle in the first instance, and then whether there are any constraints that need to be addressed, any assessment work that needs to be alongside the planning application. So we provide that initial advice, and then we support through the process of developing the planning application and essentially develop an application that's got the best chance of meeting the policy requirements, and then kind of we'll get through the process. Yeah.
Sounds good. So you got to take me back now. Where did it begin? You're not local, I know. Where did you where you come from?
Yeah. So actually, I grew up in Cornwall. Had the first 10 years of my life as a child in Cornwall. Had the best childhood, actually. You can picture it, kind of holidays in Cornwall,
beach,
on the beach. I feel like I grew up on the beach. We, a lot of surfing, a lot of swimming, a lot of playing. But actually, we lived in the middle of nowhere, right as far down as you can get, in a little place near Penzance. Yeah, so right down the bottom. And then when I was 10, I moved up to Cambridgeshire because my dad changed jobs, and it just so happened he got a job up in Cambridgeshire. My dad always worked in print, and he got a print job up in Cambridgeshire. So we moved up, and then I had some proper schooling. Because the school I went to... I was
going to say, you're saying it's not proper schooling. Yeah.
I think there were 2 children in my year. So it was a bit of a shock, let's just say, when I moved up to Cambridgeshire. But yeah, I then had my teenage years, I suppose, in Cambridgeshire, and then I came to Norfolk because I came to UEA.
Right.
So I moved up here at 18, and I've been here ever since.
And what was it at UEA? Presumably some sort of property related, or?
No, it wasn't actually. No, I did international development. So my background is actually in international development. And
what is that?
I suppose it's kind of a bit like geography, economics, that kind of thing. But the focus is on kind of the developing world, so Africa, the kind of developing economies like China, that kind of thing, Asia. Yeah, so it's through that kind of lens. My ambition at the time was to not live in the UK, but to work abroad.
What is the job role at the end of it? What you're aiming to do?
Work for an international organisation like the United Nations or the World Bank or the FAO. That was kind of my goal, I suppose. And just after I left university, I did work in Africa for a while. And I have to say I didn't enjoy it. And I came back. And actually I'd met someone at university and I decided to move back here. So then I got a job, and that's where my career at Norfolk County Council started.
Right.
I worked at Norfolk County Council for 17 years before I set up the business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's certainly a lot of experience gained, I suppose, you've got to live and breathe something before you really understand it, I guess.
Yeah.
And what was it like there?
It's a big organisation, very corporate, very political. I had many different jobs when I was at the council. I think I worked in nearly every department at the council. I started off though in transport planning, in kind of policy there, and work my way up in that kind of department. And then I suppose I probably had, I'm trying to think now, 10 jobs whilst I was at the council, moving around. I wasn't very easy to manage. I like to do my own thing, and I like to have the kind of jobs where I had the freedom to influence and change things. And
which I guess was very thin on the ground in that environment.
It could be a challenge, yeah, definitely. A couple of jobs stand out. So I had a year working in corporate under somebody who actually was really inspiring, was really good. And at the time I was planning, performance and partnerships manager. And it was the year, we're going back many years now, maybe 15 years. It was the year that there was kind of a wholesale re-election of county councillors. And I think there was massive change. And it was the year that UKIP kind of got in Norfolk. And I was there working in corporate, kind of managing that process of new elected members coming in, training them up. And getting to grips. I think we also had the Rainbow Coalition at that time because there wasn't one party that had overall control, and so there were massive changes in the way things were done in local government because of that. And it was a real eye-opener working in corporate, working across the organisation. And it was also the year that it was probably the first year we had to make massive budget cuts. And I was there responsible for this massive programme of kind of budget cuts, which hit across all departments, and, liaising with elected members and chief officers and, that kind of thing. It was a really interesting job. Yeah. And then the other job that stands out is that straight after that, I moved to adult social care, actually. And they nationally had just brought in a new bit of legislation, the Care Act. And it was my job in 9 months to bring in the Care Act across adult social services. And it was a wholesale change in the way that the department delivered services and dealt with people, and a push towards personal budgets. And yeah, it was a crazy 9 months, I knew the whole time I was working at the council, I knew that I was kind of a square peg, really. And I just had this kind of desire to run my own business. But I worked in so many different job roles.
I guess it was difficult to say which one do I actually enjoy most, or which area do I?
Yeah. And in actual fact, I've got a background in policy, and I've got a background in planning, but also many other things, change management, and transformation and performance. And an opportunity just arose. And actually it happened as I was pregnant with Polly, my second child. And I decided before I had her, that's it, I'm not going back.
Right, so was that maternity leave, or did you plan that while you were on maternity leave, or wait until you went back?
No, I think in actual fact, I'd started doing a bit of work on the side before I had Polly and went on maternity, because I knew someone else who had a consultancy business. They were really busy, and they offered me the opportunity to just do a little bit of work on the side. So that's how I got into it. And then
did you understand the work then? Were you experienced enough to perhaps?
Yeah. So this was neighbourhood planning work.
Right.
And I'd written a lot of policy and strategy documents whilst I was working at the council in lots of different areas: transport, adult care, corporately. So I had I suppose I've got a foundation, a background in strategic policy, and it is the same process that you go through pretty much, regardless of what the subject is. And so a lot of the work I did initially was kind of analysis, was going to meetings with groups, talking to them about what the issues were, consultation kind of stuff, and then I started writing the policy. Took it from there. So I kind of knew that it was something I was good at, and that there was an opportunity, because at the time there weren't many consultants in Norfolk that were doing neighbourhood planning. And so I just worked off the back of, I'd already had some involvement, and then I set up the business, and So
neighbourhood planning in general, that term or that category, was that something that was fairly new anyway, or had that been?
Yeah, it's probably been around. So the very first neighbourhood plans that actually we're starting to do a lot of reviews for now were adopted in 2015. So it was actually a fair while before then. And that came about as part of the Localism Act. But very few town and parish councils did them, I suppose, back in the early days. Yeah, and actually to start with, they were almost like mini local plans. They covered everything. They had very similar policies. They not really that effectual, if I'm being really honest.
So just tell me about the specifics that these sorts of plans. I presume they're guidelines.
Yeah.
Are they an example of what would be in the guidelines? Is it they must all be? Presumably it's not. They must all look like the same.
No. Okay, so the plans that I write now are really focused and specific, and we would look to identify a set of kind of key development priorities or a vision and objectives for a local area. And they might relate to things like making sure that housing development meets the needs of the local population rather than the needs of the wider kind of district area. They will probably have some environmental objectives around making sure that development leaves a place kind of greener. There might be specific habitat improvements that could be delivered, or green corridors. They might like to protect some local green spaces within their community, and they can do that through the neighbourhood plan. Some areas choose to allocate. So for example, we worked with Diss and the surrounding parishes. It was a really big kind of multi-parish plan, and we allocated for 350 new homes. And we did that kind of allocation. I think we had something like 15 sites within the plan that we allocated. And we did that instead of the allocations being made at the district level. So they actually can be really powerful tools to make sure the community has a say on the location of new development, and then also what goes on those sites. So say you allocate a site within a neighbourhood plan, say it's kind of a site for 25 homes, and it's on a field on the outskirts. You can also have a policy that sets out what's going to be delivered on there. So specifically, what size homes, whether they're going to be single storey, 2-storey, what kind of green infrastructure is going to be delivered alongside them, what kind of improved footways and other transport connections. So you can kind of do quite a lot.
Do you look into, if there's enough schooling in the area, if there's enough?
Yeah, so that's more of a strategic planning issue. But we would have to engage with, say, the county council as the local education authority to make sure that there was going to be sufficient capacity within local schools. And where there isn't sufficient capacity, any development that comes forward needs to make a contribution towards enhancing capacity or that kind of thing. Yeah.
Have you spoke to Steve Swindon about this? Because he's got that geographic modelling software or something.
Oh, so we do a lot of mapping actually as part of the work that we do.
He does,
And I have talked to him about that. Yeah, because his is transport related, I think. But we map all kinds of things.
Yeah, it was all sorts of things like that. It was about the number of schools and the journeys they take and all sorts of things. So
So we like to do planning that is very kind of spatial. So you look at the plans we write, and there are lots of maps in there to show you, like, this is the village centre, these are where the services are, these are where the kind of housing allocations are, all kind of things like that, footways, cycleways.
Interesting stuff. So then at what point did the normal planning come along, or did you gradually grow the other side of it first?
I want to tell you a little story actually before we get on to that. So I set up the business when I had Polly, and I carted Polly around to meetings and site visits and, all that kind of thing. I remember once I had a meeting at a big kind of corporate organisation, and took Polly in with me. And there were so many she's brought a baby in. She's brought a baby in. And I was just like, no, this is me. I'm like a working mum. I'm like, running the business. I think Polly was a month old, and someone sued me. And the person who sued, so I said to you that I set up the business and I've been doing some work on the side.
Right.
That was for a friend of mine who ran a consultancy, and he was in a partnership agreement with someone. And the person that he was in the partnership agreement with, actually, she then moved to America. So he then started working with me. And we picked up lots of work, lots of neighbourhood planning kind of work, some planning application work as well, because they also did that at the time. And she got wind of the fact that we'd been doing this work, and she decided that it contravened the partnership agreement, which to be fair, it did.
Even though she was the one
though she'd moved away, they still had the partnership agreement in place. And so for the first kind of 6 months of running the business, we were being sued. To the tune, eventually, we paid her off. We went through mitigation and we paid her off to the tune of something like 65,000.
Wow.
Yeah, so
just
that was
what you need when you're starting a business.
Not the best start to the business. And then just after that had settled, COVID hit. And I remember it because it was the second week that my 2 kids had just started in nursery for 3 days a week. So it was my first like real opportunity to have like dedicated time to do the business and run the business, because otherwise it was kind of evenings or when they were napping in the day, or, you know, that kind of thing. And second week, COVID hit. And pretty much overnight, everything went dead.
Yeah.
And then, so that also wasn't the easiest start, I suppose, to running the business.
Yeah, absolutely.
But things started to then shift online, didn't they?
Yeah.
Almost immediately. And then suddenly Zoom was everywhere.
Yeah.
And we started to do meetings and that kind of thing via Zoom. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's I was in the property world myself, it was just absolute stagnant. But then when the floodgates did open, they really seemed to, and it just went nuts. So, I guess it was a bit of a nervous time for you, just thinking, is it ever going to,
It was, I know. Well, especially as I'd kind of given up a really good job working at the county council.
Yeah, where you would have got paid furlough and everything else.
On this like crusade to do my own thing.
And
my parents thought I was mad.
Yeah.
But I suppose it just, so I've had a job ever since I could have a job. Whether that was doing work at home for my dad, making up kind of, he worked in print, and it was kind of making up leaflet packs and, getting paid for that at 14. Then I worked in the factory, in the print factory for a while. Then I worked in the hospital where my mum worked. And then as soon as I went to university, I had a bar job. So I'd always worked and always had this kind of like, I guess, entrepreneurial spirit in a way. And I was determined, I'm going to make this work. This is what I'm doing now. I'm going to make it work. So,
So then I guess, most of your work was coming from that, was it partnership? Well, it wasn't a partnership, was it? But the guy you were getting work from initially.
I think that, so obviously though, the company name was different.
Yeah.
And it was different personnel because, it was, but that did give us a bit of a foundation.
Yeah.
And of course he'd worked in a kind of strategic consultancy for kind of 15 years maybe prior to that, and actually he'd done a lot of kind of planning application work as well, and he had good contacts with architects. So actually when he came over and joined me, he did bring quite a lot of that with him in terms of contacts, and that massively helped.
I've just twigged. So he came over to you, to your new business.
Yes,
Got it.
He did. Yeah.
So when did the normal planning application help sort of start?
Yeah, so I suppose we'd always been doing a little bit of that because he brought some of that with him. But I probably started trying to really push and build up that side of the business kind of 2 years ago when I joined BNI, because I was very aware that the neighbourhood planning work was maybe at that time 80% of the turnover of the business.
So you didn't want all your eggs in one basket.
I mean, it works great. And we were doing really well, and we're really well known for neighbourhood planning across Norfolk. But the challenge with that is that the town and parish councils pay for it by getting a grant from government. And the grant programme is not guaranteed. And so when it's good, it's good.
Yeah.
But then if it just so happens that, the grants are cut overnight, we're not a viable business anymore, because most parish councils, town councils, a little bit different. Most parish councils wouldn't have the budget. So it probably costs them about 20 grand to produce a plan. Yeah. So I basically had a bit of business coaching, and I decided that I needed to really build up my network and my kind of, I guess, skill level generally in terms of doing planning applications, which is just the flip side of the coin. So if you're used to writing policy, you're also
I'd imagine that's harder than
with kind of what you do need to do to get a planning application passed. So I decided I really need to build up that side of the business and build my network of contacts. We get a lot of work through architects, builders, other people who are in the building kind of trade, I suppose, but particularly architects. And so I suppose my strategy is just to be building up relationships, and I suppose also build up our kind of credibility around doing planning applications, and become that reputation, I suppose.
So that was 2 years ago, really, you started the...
Yeah, maybe 2.5 years ago. Yeah. And then, because then I joined BNI 2 years ago. That's where we met.
Most of your work at the moment is coming from contacts and...
Yes.
Are you doing any advertising, any marketing, anything like that?
Not really, no. So actually, as a business, I've never really done that much marketing or advertising, because it's all about kind of who you are and the relationships that you've got, to be honest. There are lots of other planning consultancies in Norfolk that people could use, but it's I suppose just about growing your reputation, and the area where I guess we're particularly known for is for doing applications and supporting applications that are just outside of policy. So they are maybe a field on the edge of a settlement that wouldn't ordinarily be seen as favourable and passed. And we have quite a good success rate.
So basically the more difficult ones you want.
Yeah, the more difficult ones. Really interesting. I saw an email yesterday from the Planning Authority granting permission for an application very similar to what I just said. It's kind of edge of settlement. We started the work in 22 and it has only just gone through and got permission. I mean, they're not all like that. And one of the things I'd say is that planning is all about timing, really, because although the planning authorities have their local plans and they've got locational policies within those, and ordinarily development outside of a settlement wouldn't be supported if the planning authority is in the situation where they're not meeting their supply of homes that they need to be. So each of the planning authorities got targets. They're not hitting that target in terms of giving permissions and building homes.
Targets in terms of what? The amount they allow or the amount they disallow?
So each planning authority has got a target in terms of the number of homes that need to be built within their area. And primarily their local plan is about identifying sites for those homes. So, for example, they might have a target to deliver 800 homes over the next couple of years, the next 5 years. And they need to find sites within their local plan to meet that need. And then the expectation is that planning applications come through for those sites and they grant permission for them. And they have to demonstrate that they've got this kind of 5-year supply of housing in the pipeline. And so they're giving enough permissions and then they've got enough allocations to meet the housing supply. If they're falling short of that, all of a sudden, planning for areas that have not been identified for new homes or outside of a settlement becomes easier. Because all of a sudden they aren't delivering what they should be, and their locational policies that they've got in their local plan no longer hold so much weight in a planning decision. So that's where we come in and we can make the argument, actually, this is a really good location. It's sustainable, it's only on the edge of the settlement. There aren't any other constraints, because there are lots of other constraints, so like flood risk or environmental constraints, or there might be a heritage asset on the site. There might not be a safe highway access. So there's lots of other constraints that there might be around that site. If we can demonstrate that actually it's going to be delivering housing, helping them to meet their target, which they're falling short of, and there aren't any constraints, then they'll grant approval.
I guess most people's biggest bugbear about the whole planning process is the time. Can you, I don't know, do you know why it takes so long and why they can't just literally book an appointment, discuss everything that needs to be discussed and come out at the end of the meeting with a decision? You know, why does it just take so long? So
partly it takes a long time because people put in a planning application without giving it sufficient thought. And I suppose that's where we come in, is we would look at the constraints to the site, make sure the right assessment work had been done, make sure that they've got the best chance of getting planning permission in the first place. So that when that application is submitted, and the planning authority consult on it. So there is a statutory 21-day consultation period with any planning application, and that goes to kind of the highway authority, local residents, the environment agency, sometimes other departments within that district council, and they then kind of provide their comments as to whether they feel it's acceptable or not in their terms, looking at their specialist area. If a planning application hasn't been put together well, so for example, they missed that there's flood risk on the site and they're proposing housing in an area of flood risk, it won't get through. So then the applicant has an opportunity to redesign the proposal and resubmit. So you might then do that, resubmit, or you didn't do an ecology survey and really you should have done. You resubmit the proposal, or you resubmit having done the assessment work that you should have done in the first place. And then there's another 21-day consultation period on that. And it can go backwards and forwards. So
and presumably it's 21 days per objection or per area that comes up.
So it's per design of the proposal, I suppose. Yeah. So if you happen to move the location of a house on the site because there's a constraint that you didn't take into account, there was a bit of flooding or something like that, flood risk, then you've changed the proposal, you've changed the location of house on it, need to be reconsulted.
Yeah.
Or there are just issues that take a long time to sort out. So, for example, if there's an issue around the highway access, and highways are objecting, it then be kind of our job as the planning consultant to go to highways and to look at what might be acceptable. And it might take them, quite a while to get to that position.
Presumably they would want to go out to site and maybe look at other options, would they? And again, they presumably can't say 21 days for that sort of thing.
So,
or I don't know, bat survey or something like that. Again, that must take months.
So things get stuck in the planning process, and across Norfolk, quite a large part of Norfolk at the moment has an issue of nutrient neutrality. Yeah. Which relates...
Perhaps you can explain. I know all about it, but perhaps for those that don't, perhaps you could explain that one in lay terms if you can.
So this relates to the level of nitrogen and phosphate that is being discharged into the Broads catchment area. And it affects a number of kind of large rivers that feed into the Broads, including the Yare and the Wensum and the Bure. So pretty massive areas of South Norfolk, Norwich, Broadland, North Norfolk, some parts of Great Yarmouth and Breckland, little area in Kings Lynn, West Norfolk, are affected by this. And essentially, Natural England, I think it was nearly 3 years ago now, put a halt to the determining of any planning application that was going to have a negative impact on the level of nutrients that were going to be emitted into the Broads catchment. So rule of thumb kind of is that any application that results in more overnight stays, so if it's for residential or it's for a holiday let, or so anything like that, will have an impact because it's going to be discharging more nutrients into the river system, or to the water treatment plants, which then discharge into the river system. You know, so all residential development immediately overnight, if it was in the planning process, couldn't be approved until adequate mitigation could be set up to deal with that. And it took about kind of 1.5 to 2 years for the planning authorities to come together and to develop a credit scheme that enabled developers to mitigate their nutrient impact.
I mean, that was the biggest bugbear, wasn't it? There were all these big developers still putting up their 1,000 or so houses, but you couldn't put up one, because they didn't really understand the mitigation scheme. How are the big developers getting around it, and how do these mitigation scheme work?
So I suppose some of those big developments might have already got through and received permission prior to, the kind of it all being halted. So that's the first thing. It's also possible to mitigate on site. So if you've got a large development and you're going to be delivering a sustainable drainage system as part of that, so for like 100 homes, or you've got it's a really large site and there's land available that you could kind of plant trees or have a reed bed or whatever's needed to mitigate the impact, you could look at doing that on site. And so as long as you've got an assessment that demonstrates that it's possible to mitigate that impact, and then you can go ahead and kind of deliver that as part of the scheme, then that's also seen as acceptable. So you don't have to go down the credit system route. However, if you've got a small site, or if you've got a site in Norwich city centre, it is absolutely not going to be possible to kind of mitigate on site and deliver things like that. So,
That's interesting. I know there's I don't know if it's related, but I know there's a company going around now looking at anybody who's got a septic tank, and they're offering to pay to
that's right.
put it in because they get the credit for it, so they can then sell the credit to someone else to build. It's crazy.
That's right. Because essentially anything in a septic tank has to be pumped out into the water treatment works, like at Whitlingham, for example. Whereas if you swap that out for a water treatment plant, then that kind of manages and filters the water on site, and it usually discharges kind of clean water out into the river system. And then, I mean, there is a certain amount of having to be, the water treatment plant still needs to be
compliant
serviced and emptied to an extent, but it's a lot more environmentally friendly than just holding it all in a septic tank that then needs to be pumped out. So automatically you've got kind of an improvement when it comes to kind of nutrient impact.
But it's still madness that a company can pay to have somebody's house converted and improved. They take that credit,
that's it,
and they collect them all together, and they can build a big development or sell them as well.
That's it.
But it's all helping the environment.
It's kind of needed in the planning system as well.
No, I get it.
To enable developments.
So one of the questions I always got about the whole planning and everything like that is, who dobs you in if you don't get planning permission? Is it just neighbours? Do they go scouting around looking? Did he get that extension done? I just always think, how the hell are they going to know if you have? I know obviously when you come to sell, but I've often, dreamt of buying this big woodland or something and just building this grand design in the middle of all these woods, so no one will ever know I'm there. But I know it's impossible in real life. But I just wondered if they've ever considered maybe satellite photography or something like that to sort of automate the process of finding if you've done anything or not. But
I mean, we deal with a lot of enforcement cases. Where we kind of retrospectively then apply for planning permission for them or challenge the enforcement notice, that kind of thing. I mean, I suppose my feeling about it is that either they're running a business and it becomes apparent that they haven't got permission for what they're kind of running the business for, or it is people dobbing them in. And that happens more often than you'd imagine.
I bet.
So we do a lot of enforcement cases. The great thing about an enforcement case is that when you're in the planning system, so once you've submitted a planning application for it, the enforcement goes on hold. So the whole while that's then in the planning process, there's nothing enforcement can do. So actually it buys you a lot of time. So even if you've got something that actually probably isn't going to receive planning permission. So say you've set up a business somewhere and you've built an office and it's in the middle of nowhere, which is not where they'd usually support a new business. Then if there's enforcement, we can then submit a planning application for it, make the best case we possibly can. While it's in the planning system, enforcement action can't be taken. If the planning application is refused, we can then appeal it. And appeals now are taking around a year. So it buys a lot of time.
Have you ever come across a case where it actually ended up being knocked down? Or
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
There's no hope
but then,
for me.
But then we've also had many cases where the planning application has gone through, or actually we've won it at appeal.
Yeah. Or that they've said they'll accept it if you do this, this, and this, I guess, or change it.
Yeah. So we won an appeal for an annex, sometime last year, I think it was, and it'd been in the planning. It had enforcement out against it. It was then in the planning system, and it was refused. We appealed it, and actually we won it on appeal. Yeah. But yeah.
So what has been your
ultimate
greatest triumph so far? Be it a residential build or something really tricky, or.
So we have had some really good wins, I suppose, where we've got things through that haven't really been seen as kind of acceptable in policy terms, and that's in particularly residential development that's on the edge of a settlement. I remember we did one in Corston that was for I think it was for 3 new homes outside the settlement boundary, and actually we ended up taking it to committee. So things can be called into committee. Officers were recommending it for refusal, but we kind of did a bit of work in the background and managed to win members over, and members approved it at committee.
Do you think there's any success to be gained from like the Clarkson approach of getting everyone in the village hall and trying to get them on side?
If a planning application has got community support, it is also seen more favourably. Yeah. So if in policy terms it's not really acceptable in terms of location, if you can get the community on board, the local member on board, if you can be seen to be delivering some community benefits, so maybe as part of the scheme, you could improve footway provision, or you could put in, some formalised passing bays if the road's narrow in a particular place. If there's something like that you can do, or, community woodland, plant a community woodland as part of the development proposal, then it does actually go a long way to have community support for an application. Yeah.
So, in terms of business, where's it going? Where you see it in the next sort of 5 years, 10 years, whatever? And I wouldn't say what's the end goal. It's far too soon for that, I'm sure. But presumably, you just got to keep growing now. And is it one of those two sides you want to grow more, or?
Yeah. So I suppose I love the neighbourhood planning side of things. Like, that's almost like my roots, really. And I love the journey that you take a community on through that, because often town and parish councils want to do a neighbourhood plan because they think it's going to stop development. And actually, through the process of developing a neighbourhood plan, they realise it's not about that, and actually they can more positively influence things. And so I love that side of things, but I really want to keep growing the planning application side of the business, and I think there were real opportunities for that moving forward.
Yeah, interesting. And who would you like introductions to, or who out of our listeners might be a useful person to have a coffee with? I assume architects.
Architects.
Yeah,
definitely.
Is it likely that most architects are referring that to someone already, or is it?
So I mean, there are a lot of architects across Norfolk, and some of them just do things like extensions, which we wouldn't usually get involved in, if I'm being really honest, because it's all about the design and it's, the amenity and, that kind of thing. we would get involved if it's something that's a bit more complicated. I mean, I've talked a lot about kind of residential development on sites, but you know, there might be complexities around some of the smaller development as well that we get involved in. But yes, I suppose really we want to build up contacts with architects, small local builders. I mean, not the likes of kind of Hopkins Homes, they have their own planning consultants, but yes.
I was going to ask, do the larger ones have their own people?
Yes, they do tend to.
Would you not think well, it's hard to know who's crossed whose palm with silver, I suppose, but you'd expect the likes of the larger developers to, you know, not only have their own planners, but you'd think that the councils would almost not like them. I don't know. I don't know if they make life easier or worse for them, but I suppose they have their quotas, so I suppose it would be easier, wouldn't it? To deal
to be honest, the larger builders, the larger developers, you're right. They tend to have allocated sites. There's a lot of work that's involved in putting together a planning application for a large development of 150 homes. Because if you think about it, it's like, you know, all the internals, you know, the internal estate layout. There's so much that needs to be dealt with around that. But also, I think the larger developments, it's easier to kind of manage out any constraints as well. You know, we talked about the nutrient neutrality, didn't we? And
for example, like the Sal House, Rackheath, Sprouston, all those houses going up there.
Yeah.
I mean, they must have been talked about 10 years ago plus, mustn't they?
Yeah.
I don't know. From a guess.
Yeah. And of course, they were enabled through kind of delivery of the NDR.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the larger, you know, like the large urban extensions happening around Attleborough and Thetford, you know, they have been in the pipeline a long time. And, you know, you talked a bit about schools, didn't you, earlier? A lot of that will have an impact on kind of strategic infrastructure, healthcare, school, education. Yeah.
And it is, where does it end, doesn't it? Because, you know, okay, you can provide, you know, local schools, local doctors, local, I don't know, whatever you need, shops. But that still impacts the overall infrastructure, the police, the people who aren't local, the hospitals. You know,
absolutely,
It's not just confined to that area, is
and
it?
development does make contribution towards that as well.
Yeah. And even the roads to get to those
absolutely.
places.
Yeah.
There's a lot to be considered, I can imagine. But.
Yeah.
So it's architects. Anyone else you think might be?
I suppose that anyone involved in planning.
Yeah. Or equally, anyone planning to build their own home. If it's going to be a tricky one.
We do a lot of self-build applications. Yeah, that's right. We do a lot of barn conversions as well, actually. Yeah, because you can convert an agricultural barn into a new house without having planning permission. So it is prior approval that's required.
I actually meant to ask you this. Are there any other things like that which people maybe don't realise or don't consider?
Yeah.
Certainly, you know, just like the permitted development. I think a lot of people don't know about that.
No, they don't. No. So if I talk about the kind of barn conversion first, if you put in a planning application to build a new house in the middle of nowhere on a farm, and it was new, then it would probably be refused because it's in the middle of nowhere, it's in the countryside, it's, you know, not in a sustainable location. If you've got a barn that meets certain criteria in terms of it's part of the agricultural holding, it's structurally sound, it's possible to convert, then you, as long as you kind of justify that, and we would put together the justification that it meets the criteria, then you will get approval for a new house there. Yeah.
Will.
You will.
Or might. No, will.
You should.
Yeah.
You should. Yeah.
And the permitted development, again, what's that for?
Yeah, so there are some things that you can do without having to apply for planning permission. So you can extend your home.
See, this actually shocked me when I first looked at it. I didn't realise how big you can actually do it without planning, but that doesn't mean to say you've still got building regs and you've still got the...
No, that's absolutely right, yeah. So you can actually make quite a lot of changes to your own home without going for planning permission. unless you're in a conservation area. Or you've had your permitted development rights removed for some reason. So it's worth kind of checking those things out. And it is also worth just checking to make sure that, I can do this in permitted developments rights. And it's quite technical. There's a kind of a long list of requirements and things you can do or can't do. So, for example, you can't build to the front of your home or to the side usually. It has to be to the back. Then it has to be kind of a certain distance from the boundary sometimes. So there are lots of kind of requirements, and you just need to have a little look at it depending on what you want to do. So, also worth just checking that out. Quite a lot of people who build extensions under permitted development will go for a lawful development certificate. So they will get that from the council, and it just is a certificate to say, yes, you can, you have lawfully. Yeah. So it's not planning permission, but it is a certificate.
I always wonder, there must be a pretty grey area in terms of where what does fall under permitted development, what doesn't. So, for example, if you put a bloody great conservatory on the back of your house, you're fine. Yeah. But if you then later on change the roof to a fully pitched roof, or does it then change?
So it depends on it depends. Also, there's things like it depends on whether the roof kind of materials that have been used match in with the materials of your home. So there's things about that.
Is there a limit to the size of conservatory? Is a conservatory just not part of planning at all, or is it considered?
So it would still be considered to be kind of building out.
Right.
Okay. but I mean,
better say not more. Better say no more on camera. But I thought conservatory's fine regardless of size, but perhaps wrong on that one. So a carport then.
A carport would need planning permission, depending on.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh God. Okay.
Yeah. Oops. Depending on where it is, though, on your property.
If it's just a polycarbonate roof, maybe, or that wouldn't be
that would probably be okay. Yeah. I was thinking, when you said it to me, I was thinking about a planning application that I'm doing for a carport at the moment, and which has already been refused once. But that is to the front of the property.
And a detached one, because I'm just thinking down the side of a house.
It's detached. I mean, to put up something like a lean-to or a carport like that, you probably wouldn't need planning permission, but it depends on the location.
Yeah.
And the size.
Yeah, well, I think there are, just in Norfolk alone, probably thousands of extensions, extra bits, converted buildings that weren't recorded years ago that have just been swept under the carpet. There must be, because quite often people just don't think of it.
The other thing that people often do is there'll be an extension to the property already, and then they'll extend again.
And because one on its own doesn't.
And in fact the second one probably on its own doesn't. But permitted development rights are based on the original size of the property.
And what about garage conversions? If it's a detached,
you need planning permission for that.
Okay.
Yeah, because you are turning something that is ancillary to the house into part of the residence.
What if it's not habitable? If it's just going from a garage, say, to an office or a...
Then you might get away with that.
Might, but do you still want to check, I guess?
Yeah. So through COVID, lots of people had garden rooms put in, didn't they? And they had the office in the garden. And to a large extent, that kind of thing is acceptable without planning permission. But if you've suddenly got kind of a toilet in there or kitchen in there, then they would then class that's not ancillary to the house. You could potentially live in there, and it becomes its own kind of unit, and you would need planning permission for that. So as soon as...
There's lots of grey areas, isn't there? If
as
it's got
soon
this,
as an outbuilding, for example, becomes not ancillary to the house, so it could be, used in its own right as such, you need planning permission.
Interesting. There's a few things I might need help on there.
As is the case for many people.
But, I look at houses for sale all the time, and I don't even think solicitors are clued up enough to know, and they don't know the physical property. They've never visited the property, so it's not down to them to say, this building on the back, has it got planning permission? They wouldn't know to ask the question because they've never been to the property. So it's most people think, I've got to get this sorted out before I sell it. But actually, have they? Because, no one really is going to ask that question unless you're the buyer. And even then, you've got to be clued up enough to know. So.
And then also, sometimes it depends on how long it's been there. So you can go for a lawful development certificate if it's more than 10 years, 10 years or more. Yeah,
but still, it's got to meet various requirements.
No, not in the same way. No.
Okay.
No.
So, hypothetically, I built an office down the end of my garden.
Yeah.
10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, and it turns out you needed planning permission for it. I mean, it depends on the size.
Okay, I bought a plot of land with forest with a woodland, and I built a Grand Designs home in the middle of it, and I got away with it for 10 years.
Yeah, yes.
I would get away with it?
Yeah.
Really?
Because you would demonstrate that you've been lawfully using it for that purpose for the last 10 years, and therefore it's acceptable.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you've only got to hide it for 10 years. And then...
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
I think I did see something in a newspaper once about someone had literally hidden it with like bales of straw or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
But then I suppose you'd be noticed all the cranes going in and out of the stuff.
Well, yeah, to build a Grand Design kind of house. Yes.
Okay, I think we've covered everything, unless you've got anything else to add. But no, that's been really fascinating, and I hope it continues to grow, and onwards and upwards. Thanks for coming in. Thank you.
The Norfolk Business Show with Danny Snelling.